Elena Martinez Hayes watched her husband David pour wine into two glasses, the golden liquid catching the light from their kitchen's pendant lamps. 20 years of marriage, and he still remembered she preferred her Chardonnay slightly chilled, but not cold. These small gestures had become the threads that wove their life together, predictable, comfortable, perfect. "The kids are finally both out for the evening," David said, sliding her glass across the marble countertop. At 45, he still had the same warm brown eyes that had captivated her in college, though silver now threaded through his dark hair. "Maya's at Jessica's studying for her SATs, and Alex is at soccer practice until 9. Elena smiled, tucking a strand of her auburn hair behind her ear. "A rare Saturday night alone. What should we do with ourselves?" Her voice carried a playful undertone that made David's eyes crinkle at the corners. They'd built this life methodically, like architects of happiness. Their Tudor-style home in Westchester sat on 2 pristine acres, complete with the garden Elena had always dreamed of, and David's workshop where he restored vintage guitars. Elena's interior design business had flourished, while David's architectural firm had made him a partner 3 years ago. On paper, they were living the American dream. David moved behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders as she leaned against the counter. His fingers found the tension spots he'd memorized over 2 decades, working gentle circles that made her sigh contentedly. "I love when you do that," she murmured, tilting her head back against his chest. The familiar scent of his cologne, woody with hints of bergamot, wrapped around her like a favorite sweater. 20 years, and I still love the way you melt when I touch you here," he whispered against her ear, his breath warm on her neck. His hands moved lower, tracing the curve of her waist through her silk blouse. Elena turned in his arms, her fingers playing with the buttons of his shirt. "The way you look at me, sometimes I feel like we're still those crazy college kids who couldn't keep their hands off each other." Their kiss started soft, familiar, but deepened as David lifted her onto the counter, his hands tangling in her hair. This was their rhythm after all these years, passionate but comfortable, intimate yet safe. They made love with the practiced ease of partners who knew exactly how to please each other, every touch choreographed by years of shared intimacy. Later, as they lay entwined on the living room couch, Elena traced patterns on David's chest. The fireplace cast dancing shadows across their faces, and she felt that deep contentment that comes with knowing you're exactly where you belong. "We're lucky, you know," she said softly. "How many couples make it 20 years and still actually like each other?" David's arm tightened around her. "We're perfect together, Elle. Always have been." Neither of them noticed how the word perfect hung in the air like a challenge to the universe, or how David's phone, forgotten on the side table, briefly lit up, with a notification before going dark again. 3 weeks later, Elena was folding laundry in their bedroom when David's phone buzzed on the nightstand. The screen lit up with an incoming call, and she glanced over absently before calling out, "Honey, your phone." But when she saw the name, her hand stilled on the cotton shirt she was holding. Isabella Reyes. The name hit her like a physical blow, transporting her back 22 years to a petite brunette with knowing eyes who had been David's first real love. David appeared in the doorway, hair still damp from his shower. "Who is it, Isabella?" Elena said, her voice carefully neutral as she handed him the phone. For just a moment, barely a heartbeat, David's face went completely blank. Then something flickered across his features that Elena had never seen before. Guilt. I'll take this downstairs," he said, accepting the phone but not meeting her eyes. Elena watched him leave, her pulse beginning to race. In 20 years of marriage, David had never hidden a phone call from her. Not once. She moved to the top of the stairs, her bare feet silent on the hardwood. "Isabella," she heard him say, his voice soft, intimate in a way that made her stomach clench. I didn't expect you to call. Elena crept closer, her heart hammering against her ribs. I know we said we'd keep it to messages, but I couldn't stop thinking about what you said yesterday. There was a pause, and when David spoke again, his voice was strained. You can't ask me that. You know I can't just... Another pause. Elena pressed herself against the wall, hardly breathing. Isabella, please. This is complicated. I have a family. Elena doesn't know we've been talking, and if she found out... His voice dropped so low Elena had to strain to hear. Of course I've thought about it, every day since we reconnected, but thinking and doing are two different things. The words hit Elena like shattered glass. Every day. They'd been talking every day. Your husband doesn't deserve you, David continued, and Elena could hear him pacing. He never did. But leaving everything behind. Starting over. God, Isabella, when I think about holding you again. Elena gripped the banister, her knuckles white. The David downstairs wasn't her husband. This man speaking in hushed, desperate tones to another woman. This stranger who was imagining holding someone else. I need time, David said finally. This isn't just about us anymore. There are kids involved, careers, an entire life we'd be dismantling. But Isabella, I haven't felt this alive in years. When Elena heard his footsteps on the stairs, she fled back to the bedroom, frantically returning to the laundry pile. Her hands shook as she folded and refolded the same shirt. David appeared in the doorway, his face carefully composed. Work call, he said casually. Crisis with the Morrison project. Elena looked up at him. This man she'd shared 20 years with, whose body she knew better than her own, whose lies she'd never imagined she'd have to detect. On a Sunday night? You know how it is. Architecture never sleeps. He attempted their familiar smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. That night, Elena lay beside David in their king-sized bed, listening to his breathing and knowing he wasn't asleep either. The space between them felt like an ocean. When she finally drifted off near dawn, she dreamed of cracks spreading through perfect glass, spider-webbing outward until everything shattered. The next morning, David found her making coffee in their kitchen, the same kitchen where they'd made love just weeks before. The marble countertops, the pendant lights, the life they'd built. Everything looked the same, but felt foreign. Elena, he said quietly, we need to talk. Elena set down her coffee mug with trembling hands. I heard you, David. Last night. I heard everything. David's face crumpled, 20 years of careful composure dissolving in an instant. He sank into the chair across from her, his head in his hands. God, Elena, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. How long? The words came out as a whisper. 3 months. His voice was hollow. She found me on LinkedIn first, then Facebook. Said she was going through a difficult time with her marriage and saw my profile. It started so innocently, Elle. Just catching up. Elena felt something cold spreading through her chest. Catching up for 3 months? Daily conversations? Planning to leave your family? Her voice rose with each word. That sounds incredibly innocent, David. He looked up at her then, and she saw tears in his eyes. It wasn't supposed to become this. She remembered me, the person I used to be, before mortgages and parent-teacher conferences and routine. Routine? Elena's voice cracked. Is that what our life is to you? Routine? No, that's not what I meant. Then what did you mean when you told her you haven't felt this alive in years? The words tasted bitter in her mouth. What did you mean when you said you think about holding her every day? David flinched as if she'd slapped him. Elena, you don't understand. Isabella and I, we had this connection in college, this intensity. And when she reached out, all those feelings just came flooding back. She's getting divorced, and she said if I were free too, maybe we could have the chance we never got. The chance you never got? Elena stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. What about the chance we had? What about the 20 years we built together? What about our children? I think about that every day, David said, his voice breaking. Maya and Alex, this house, our life together. But Elena, if I'm being honest, when was the last time you looked at me the way you used to? When was the last time we talked about dreams instead of schedules? When was the last time we made love because we couldn't keep our hands off each other, not because it was Saturday night and the kids were out? The accusation hung between them like a blade. Elena felt something inside her chest crack open, because he wasn't entirely wrong. Somewhere between soccer practices and business dinners and the comfortable rhythm of long marriage, they'd stopped seeing each other. Really seeing each other? So this is my fault? She whispered. No! David reached for her, but she stepped back. Elena, no. This is on me. I made the choice to keep talking to her. I made the choice to let it become emotional. I made the choice to... He swallowed hard. To fall in love with her again. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. She gripped the counter behind her, her legs suddenly unsteady. You love her? I think I never stopped loving her, David admitted, the confession seeming to tear from somewhere deep inside him. And I love you too, Elena. I love our life, our family. But with Isabella, it's like being 23 again. Like being the person I was before I became careful and responsible and married to me. David's silence was answer enough. Elena walked to the window overlooking the garden she'd spent years cultivating. The roses were in full bloom, perfect and beautiful and requiring constant tending. Like their marriage, she realized. Beautiful on the surface, but demanding such careful maintenance that somewhere along the way they'd forgotten why they'd planted the garden in the first place. What happens now? She asked without turning around. I don't know, David said quietly. Isabella asked me to make a choice. She's filing for divorce either way, but she wants to know if we have a future together. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the morning sun warm on her face. And what did you tell her? That I need time. That I owe you the truth first. He paused. Elena, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. She turned to face him then, this man she'd loved for half her adult life. But you did, David. You already did. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange, suspended reality. David moved to the guest room, and they told the children he was having back problems and needed a firmer mattress. Elena threw herself into work, staying late at client meetings and burying herself in fabric samples and floor plans. David worked even longer hours, coming home after everyone was asleep, but the pretense cracked during Maya's Saturday soccer game. Are you and Dad getting divorced? 17-year-old Maya asked as they sat in Elena's car afterward, her cleats muddy on the floor mat. Elena's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Why would you ask that? Because you haven't looked at each other in 2 weeks. And Dad's been sleeping in the guest room. I'm not stupid, Mom. Maya's voice carried a maturity that reminded Elena painfully of herself at that age, forced to grow up too quickly by adult complications. That night, after the kids were in bed, Elena found David in his workshop, sanding a guitar neck with methodical precision. The familiar smell of wood shavings and varnish brought back memories of their early marriage when she used to bring him coffee and watch him work. Maya knows something's wrong, she said from the doorway. David set down his sandpaper, his shoulders sagging. I figured she might. She's always been perceptive. We can't keep living like this, David. This limbo is killing all of us. He turned to face her, And in the workshop's soft light, she could see how much weight he'd lost, how the strain had carved new lines around his eyes. I know. I've been trying to figure out what's right, what's fair to everyone. And have you? Elena stepped into the workshop, running her fingers along a guitar he'd restored years ago. Figured it out? I think. David's voice was rough with exhaustion. I think I've been living in a fantasy. Isabella represents this version of myself that I missed, this road not taken. But Elena, we built something real. We made people. We made a life. Elena felt something shift in her chest. Not quite hope, but not quite despair either. But I also think we stopped trying, both of us. We got comfortable, and comfortable isn't the same as connected. He moved closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, faded now after a long day. I don't know if we can find our way back to each other, Elena, and I don't know if it's fair to ask you to try. What if I want to try? The words surprised her as much as they seemed to surprise him. What if I think 20 years is worth fighting for? David's eyes searched her face. Even after what I've done? Even knowing I developed feelings for someone else? I won't pretend it doesn't hurt. I won't pretend I trust you the way I did 3 weeks ago. Elena took a shaky breath. But David, when I imagine my life without you, when I imagine explaining to Maya and Alex that we're getting divorced because we got bored, it feels like giving up on something precious. The space between them seemed to shimmer with possibility and danger in equal measure. David reached out tentatively, his fingers brushing her cheek. I would have to cut all contact with Isabella. Completely. No messages, no calls, nothing. And could you do that? I don't know, he admitted, his honesty cutting deep. Part of me will always wonder what if. Part of me will always love who she was to me, who I was with her. But Elena, his thumb traced along her jawline. I fell. In love with you when I was 25 years old, and I chose you every day for 20 years. I want to choose you again. When he kissed her, it tasted like salt and sorrow and the faintest possibility of redemption. Elena kissed him back, pouring 20 years of shared history into it. Their wedding day, Maya's first steps, Alex's piano recitals, every Sunday morning in bed, every fight and makeup and quiet moment of contentment. They made love that night. In his workshop, surrounded by the tools of his craft and the smell of wood and varnish. It was desperate and tender and completely different from their comfortable married intimacy. They touched each other like people trying to memorize skin, like lovers who weren't sure they'd get another chance. Afterward, lying on the old couch he kept for late nights, Elena traced the scar on David's shoulder from when Alex had accidentally hit him with a baseball bat. This is going to be hard, she whispered. The hardest thing we've ever done, David agreed, his arms tightening around her. And there's no guarantee we'll make it. No guarantee at all. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her choice settling around them like a blanket. Then we better be sure we both really want to try. 1 year later, Elena stood in the same kitchen where everything had unraveled, but the space felt different now. Lighter, somehow. More honest. The marble countertops held the same morning coffee routine, but the silence between her and David was comfortable rather than strained. Isabella's getting remarried, David said quietly, looking up from his phone. Her sister posted on Facebook. Elena felt the familiar twist in her stomach that Isabella's name still caused, but it was duller now, more manageable. How do you feel about that? David considered the question seriously. One of the things their marriage counselor, Dr. Patterson, had taught them. To really think before answering, to sit with feelings instead of dismissing them. Relieved, mostly, he said finally. It feels like the last door closing on that chapter. They'd chosen counseling over divorce, but it hadn't been easy. The first 6 months were brutal. Sessions where Elena screamed and David wept, where They excavated 20 years of small resentments and unspoken needs. They'd separated for 2 months last summer when the work felt too hard, too raw, but they'd come back. They'd kept showing up. "Maya called last night," Elena said, pouring herself a second cup of coffee. "She says she can tell we're different now, more present with each other." Their daughter was a freshman at Northwestern now, studying journalism, with the same intensity she'd once applied to soccer. Alex, now 16, had initially struggled with the tension in the house, but had eventually admitted he preferred their honest fights to the polite distance that had preceded them. "I saw the way you looked at me during dinner last night," David said, moving behind her chair to rest his hands on her shoulders. "It reminded me of how you used to look at me when we were dating." Elena leaned back against him, marveling at how his touch could still send warmth through her after all they'd been through. "Dr. Patterson says we're doing the work of falling in love again instead of just staying married out of habit." "Is that what we're doing?" David's hands found the knots in her shoulders, but his touch was different now, more intentional, less automatic. "I think so." Elena turned in her chair to face him. "I think we broke something that needed to be broken. The idea that love is supposed to be effortless, that marriage maintains itself." David cupped her face in his hands, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek. At 46, Elena had laugh lines and silver threading through her auburn hair, but when David looked at her now, she felt truly seen in a way she hadn't in years. "I love you," he said, and the words carried weight now. Not the casual "love you too" of routine, but a conscious choice spoken aloud. "I love you too," Elena replied, meaning it completely. "Even when I want to strangle you, especially then." They'd learned to fight better, to desire better, to forgive better. Their intimacy had evolved from comfortable familiarity to something more intentional, more present. They made love now like people who understood how fragile and precious connection really was. The morning sun streamed through their kitchen windows, illuminating the life they'd chosen to rebuild rather than abandon. Elena's garden was different now, too. She'd torn out the perfect roses and planted wildflowers, creating something beautiful but untamed, something that could survive a little neglect and still bloom. "What are you thinking about?" David asked, following her gaze to the garden. "Just this. Us. How we almost threw it all away because we thought love was supposed to feel like it did when we were 25. And now?" Elena smiled, standing to wrap her arms around his waist. "Now I think love at 45 is different. Deeper, more complicated. It has scars and stretch marks and requires actual work." She kissed him softly. "But it's ours. We built it together, broke it together, and chose to rebuild it together." David held her close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, feeling grateful for the crisis that had forced them to choose each other consciously instead of simply staying together by default. Outside their window, the wildflowers swayed in the morning breeze, imperfect, resilient, and beautiful in their chaos. Just like the marriage they'd decided was worth saving. In the distance, David's phone buzzed with a text from their contractor about the guest room renovation. They were converting it back into David's home office now that they were sharing their bedroom again. Some things, once broken and repaired, became stronger than they'd ever been before. Elena squeezed David's hand as they stood together in their kitchen. Two people who'd learned that perfect wasn't the same as precious, and that sometimes the best things in life were worth fighting for.